I'm going to start off with two of Langston Hughes's most famous poems that exemplify the reason he began writing poetry. The first poem is A Dream Deferred. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? In A Dream Deferred, Hughes expresses his fear of having his dreams deferred by portraying only negative possibilities of what happens to dreams when they are forgotten. This poem shows that Hughes never even considered positive possibilities for his forgotten dreams. This is likely because of his own experiences, such as dreaming of being treated like the white children around him, and only being singled out and even hit with stones. Hughes's fear of the dream of equality being forgotten is what prompted him to give blacks a voice through his poetry. The second poem is called Mother to Son. Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it, and splinters, and boards torn up, and places with no carpet on the floor bare. But all the time I've been climbing on, and reaching landings, and turning corners, and sometimes going in the dark, where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn your back. Don't you sit down on the steps, 'cause you find it kinda hard. Don't you fall now, for I'm still goin', honey. I'm still climbing, and life for me ain't been no crystal staircase. In Mother to Son, a mother is explaining to her son that life is not a crystal staircase. Life is a staircase with splinters, nails, torn carpet, and rough places. However, you must keep climbing despite these adversities. This poem was a message to all Black Americans to keep climbing the staircase of life despite the segregation and racism blocking the way. I wanted to start off with these poems to show you the reason that Langston Hughes began writing poetry in the first place. He wanted to give a voice to all Black Americans struggling to break free of the oppression of segregation. James Mercer Langston Hughes, better known as just Langston Hughes, was born in Joplin, Missouri on February 1st, 1902. Soon after his birth, his parents, James Hughes and Carrie Langston, separated. Hughes's father moved to Mexico and his mother moved around often, so he was raised by his grandmother. After her death in his early teens, Hughes moved to Lincoln, Illinois to live with his mother and stepfather. The family moved to several cities before settling in Cleveland, Ohio. While attending high school in Cleveland, Hughes was introduced to the poetry of Walt Whitman and Carl Sandburg, two men who would later become his main influences. Hughes wrote for the school newspaper and frequently submitted his poetry to poetry magazines. However, they were always rejected and never published. Hughes graduated high school in 1920 and decided to move to Mexico to be with his father. During this time, Hughes's poem The Negro Speaks of Rivers was published in the Crisis magazine. This is a recording of Langston Hughes explaining how this poem came to be and reciting it.
I looked out the window and I saw this great muddy river flowing down toward the heart of the South, and I began to think about what this river meant to the Negro people, how, in a sense, our history was linked to this river, how in slavery time my grandmother told me that to be sold down the Mississippi was one of the worst things that could happen to a Negro slave. And then I remembered that I'd read about Abraham Lincoln going down the Mississippi as a young man, and he went on a raft to New Orleans, and he saw human beings bought and sold in the slave market there, and he was so horrified by this that he never forgot it. And many years later, of course, we know that it was Lincoln who signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And so, as the train went on into the gathering dusk, because it had been about sunset when we crossed the river, I took my father's letter out of my pocket and began to write down on the back of his letter this poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo, and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers.
The Negro Speaks of Rivers is a free verse poem. The lines "I've known rivers and my soul has grown deep like the rivers" are each repeated once at the beginning and once at the end of the poem for emphasis. The lines cut off abruptly, causing the reader's eyes to zigzag as they read the poem, much like the way a river zigzags and bends. The poetic style of this poem is noticeably similar to one of Hughes's greatest influences, Walt Whitman, especially in the use of first person. In 1921, Hughes returned to the United States and enrolled at Columbia University. During this time, he began to become involved in the Harlem Renaissance. This was a period of cultural, social, and artistic explosion in Harlem, New York. Harlem became a cultural center which attracted black writers, poets, artists, and scholars. To gain a better understanding of Hughes's role in the Harlem Renaissance and the challenges he and all black Americans faced during this time period, here is a short video.